Political commentator and columnist Melanie Verwoerd recently discovered her family was affected by the coronavirus when her two daughters tested positive for COVID-19. She joins us now via Skype to tell us more about what the experience has been for the family. And Melanie, thank you. We really thank you so much for talking to us here on the program.
Hi, Leanne.
So, Melanie, just to get the facts through to viewers, you're still awaiting your test. You went last week, and this was on Thursday. You're still waiting. Your daughters, however, have they both tested positive?
My daughter and my son, yeah. My daughter got sick a week and a half ago, and she was tested last Monday and got her result back in 2 days' time, and she tested positive. We all had some form of symptoms at that time, and not as sick as she was, which was interesting. My son and I had very, very light symptoms at the time, but we all isolated just because we could see that she was very sick. And then my son was tested the next day, and he got his results only 5 days later, and I'm still waiting for my results. I was tested last Thursday.
Yeah. So you're all obviously in quarantine right now, so that, that goes without saying.
Oh, absolutely. And, the important thing that people must realize is that you can be actually fairly asymptomatic. In fact, you can be totally asymptomatic. And in our case, if we hadn't known that there was a possibility that my daughter had it, and therefore that there was a high likelihood that we could have contracted it, we would have thought we just had a cold and in the beginning, and certainly wouldn't have isolated under normal circumstances. But given the time that we're in, if people even start feeling slightly off, they must just isolate. We know now we'll have to be at home in any case from Thursday onwards. But this is why it's so important that we go into these more dramatic lockdown, is because we can so easily infect people without even knowing it.
Yeah, Melanie, I want to go a little bit more into what you're feeling and what your daughter and your son are feeling, because from the column that you wrote yesterday, which by the way was very, very educational, and I found it particularly interesting to read because it gives you a glimpse into what a person actually feels and how you're all feeling very different at this point. So, what are you feeling? Before we move on to your children, how are you feeling? I can see that you're coughing here and there, but generally inside, how are you feeling?
Yeah, physically, obviously, there's physical symptoms, but then there's also the emotional side of it. The physical symptoms of it for me and for my son were relatively light. You can hear that I've got this cough. We started off just feeling, interestingly, and it's important that people realize this. So the symptoms weren't, in our case, than what people would talk about. We started off with diarrhea. We never had a fever. We just got extremely tired, but, in an extreme where you just fall asleep sitting at the table. And, sore throats. My son didn't have a sore throat. And the chest issue in his case, even though he's an asthmatic, never came. Mine only came in the last few days. My daughter was much more dramatic, high fevers, etc. So physically, at this stage now, it's exhaustion and then this cough that's still there. Emotionally, of course, it's a bit of a roller coaster ride. As a mother, I was extremely concerned about my children, especially my daughter, who was so incredibly sick. So, it's emotional. And then, of course, it is true that when you're feeling sick and then you're isolated, and for my son, what was one of the worst symptoms was that we lost all our sense of taste and smell. And I now read an article this morning in the New York Times that doctors are realizing that that's one of the symptoms that people need to watch out for. So not, the things that usually give you joy when you're sick, like eating nice things and so on, just didn't help because we couldn't taste it. So emotionally, it gets to you after a while. And also, because I think there's such a lot of prejudice around it. While we were feeling sick, really sick, we felt that we weren't going to tell anybody except the people that we had contact with. So we didn't tell neighbors and so on because we didn't want people to freak out. But that's not necessarily a good thing, because then you also feel very lonely and fearful, that people might be prejudiced and so on. And so I think this is also why we decided to speak out, that people understand this is not something that people should be prejudiced about or angry towards people. Everybody's going to have this at some point in the next year. So we need to stick together and help one another.
Melanie, when you started feeling the symptoms, you started feeling sick, and your daughter, as you say, was possibly the worst affected by it. Did you have any problem getting tested? Because some of the people that I'm speaking to and that we're hearing and writing to us are saying that they're being refused to be tested because they don't fall into the category of those that need to be tested, and that category right now is particularly for people that have traveled out of the country. You, in your article, state that you may have contracted it after you went to a wedding that had a lot of international guests at. So talk to us about your experience of getting tested. Did you go through problems, and what was that test like?
My daughter tested the day after the president did his original announcement. So I think at that stage the system wasn't so overloaded, and she exhibited all the classic symptoms. So in all our cases, you have to speak to your GP first over the phone. They have to give you a letter, and you have to take the letter to the pathologist if you're testing privately. I unfortunately have very limited experience about the public health system, so I don't know exactly how it works in the public health system. So in her case, she tested at the medical clinic in Cape Town, and it worked really well, although it took them very long to deal with every patient because they were so incredibly thorough. I'm sure that would have changed by now. My son's case, it was very easy, and in my case, actually, it wasn't so difficult to get to the testing because both of us had then exhibited symptoms, and by the time I tested, we knew my daughter's result. So we didn't have difficulty in getting to the testing centers or being swabbed as soon as you have the GP's letter, but it's the results that's now the backlog. And it seems some labs are struggling more, some of the chains are struggling more than others. My daughter's was with one pathology lab, and they seem to be managing quite well, where the ones that my son and I went to is a different company, and they seem to be taking much, much longer. I don't know, people who tested after me have their results already and I don't. So I think, it's not so much that it's the testing of it that's the problem. It is more on the lab side that the delays are. But people also need to understand we need to test the people that are actually sick. And this is why they are being a little bit strict about it. If you don't have any symptoms at this stage, don't just go and test because you want to know. Because also we're going to start getting positives where people might get sick then in the next few days, contracted, and then you're going to have a false sense of security. So people need to wait until they have symptoms. Once they have symptoms and their GPs are well trained to know whether it's justified or not, then they will give you a letter to go. They want to also not let sick people walk around and or they need to know because they need to plot the epidemic. So it's just a question of, at this stage, everybody thinks they need to go and test so they can prove that they are not positive, but they are overloading the system, and that's also why people are also, of course, asking you to wait until you have symptoms.
Indeed. All right, I'm going to throw a couple of questions at you that I suppose maybe might be useful to some people at this time. We've got a few minutes left. So medication that you're taking, what have you been told to take? How are you handling this? Are you just treating the symptoms?
Yeah, so you can only treat the symptoms at this stage. I'm of course not a medic, so you should really ask questions like that for the medical, because I can speak from our experience. Of course, you're treating, if you do have a high fever, like my daughter had, we had to keep that fever under control, which was very, very difficult. She had a fever of over 39 degrees for 4 days, which was very tough. And that's really it. In our case, we handled it with paracetamol. From what I understand, or what we were told, they prefer that you don't use ibuprofen, just because there are some concern about suppression of the immune system, etc. I think they only use that if they cannot manage the fever in any other way. So in our case, it was just paracetamol, and just to keep that down.
Yeah, I mean these are
vitamins. Sorry, that's the other thing. The big thing that we could see from our family was that my daughter was very run down by the time she got it. She had a altercation with a poisonous spider a few weeks earlier. And so her immune system was run down, and she got it much, much worse than we did. And so if people can boost up with things like vitamin C and other vitamins that their doctors can recommend, then, that certainly would help.
Yeah. Your reaction to the lockdown, because, I mean, you've been in lockdown, you know how contagious this is. So I imagine, just like the rest of South Africa, you and your family were gathered in front of the TV last night. You heard about this lockdown coming into effect Thursday midnight. What was your reaction?
Yeah, and it's absolutely the right thing to do at this stage, because the point is that we've, like I've said earlier, people can walk around and not have this. We've also seen in our case where we did not even need any hospitalization, just how time-consuming and how much pressure it puts, even in our case, on the medical system, where doctors had to follow up with us. The hospital was in touch once or twice. The Cape Town Health Department was in touch. And I really, really, Leanne, I think we need to know that these are the people we need to take care of as well in the next few months, are all the medics and all the public health officials that are working already so hard, because they're already sounding very tired, and we're just at the beginning of this. And I really want to, my experience has been mainly with the Western Cape government side, and even the MEC, David Maynier, got in touch a couple of times to check whether everybody's okay and so on. So I really, really want to, extend my appreciation about the way they've handled it. But the point is, we did not need hospitalization. Our immune systems would be, comparative to most South Africans, very, very strong. And we got, especially my daughter, got very, very sick. If this thing hits the poorer areas, we are going to see an absolute catastrophe. And I can tell you that now from personal experience. So, and people don't listen. A lot of people don't. A lot did. But a lot of people are still trying to see if they can cheat the government's regulations, by ordering loads of drinks just before or 6 o'clock, or just quickly running out and doing things. We can't do that. We are inadvertently, we will kill thousands and thousands of South Africans by doing that. And so I don't think government has a choice. We need to slow down this epidemic. We need to flatten the curve. And if we do in the next 2 to 3 weeks, as with this lockdown, we can actually do this as South Africans. We know how to pull together. And if we do this, we can actually build a future for this country again. But if we don't, and we have, scenes like we've seen in Italy and that we're hearing from in Iran, we will destroy this country. Yeah. And so I think the president was unbelievably brave last night. I think he's exceptional in the way that he's taking leadership at the moment, him and his cabinet. And I think generally, from speaking over WhatsApp with so many people last night, I think the people of this country accept what's going to happen now and really appreciate his leadership.
Yeah, Melanie, we thank you for your time and your views, and please accept our well wishes during this time to you and both of your children as well, and strength. But you're still looking good, if that counts. That's what Sakina and I were saying. You may feel sick.
Lots of makeup.
You're looking good. You're looking good. Thank you. Thanks for talking to us here on the program. We'll let Melanie go now. Melanie Verwoerd, a political commentator and columnist as well, talking to us about her experience with COVID-19. She's still awaiting her results. However, her daughter has tested positive. So has her son. And they're in quarantine at the moment. So she was giving us an idea and a glimpse into the life of a family that is currently struggling with COVID-19.